When I was 17, my parents decided to celebrate their 20th anniversary by going on a cruise. It was the first time they had ever left me completely alone in the house for more than a single night. I, of course, projected an air of mature responsibility they could trust, while internally, I was already planning a weekend of unrestrained junk food consumption and watching horror movies on the big living room television at a volume that would normally get me a stern lecture. The house itself was the one I'd grown up in, a standard two-story colonial plopped in the middle of a quiet suburban cul-de-sac. Its personality was my personality. I knew the groan of the third step on the staircase, the particular way the faucet in the upstairs bathroom had to be turned to stop its incessant dripping, and the exact spot on the living room floor where the afternoon sun would land, creating a perfect, warm rectangle for napping. It was my sanctuary, a place so familiar that I could navigate it blindfolded. That familiarity, I had believed, was a form of safety. The first night was glorious. I ordered a large pizza with all the toppings my health-conscious mother despised, binged 3 terrible slasher films back-to-back, and left the empty pizza box on the coffee table, a brazen act of temporary rebellion. I fell asleep on the couch, wrapped in an old Afghan, feeling utterly content in my solitary kingdom. The world outside was muffled and still. A light, feathery snow had begun to fall around dusk, blanketing the neighborhood in a pristine layer of white that absorbed all sound. It was the kind of deep, profound quiet that only a snowstorm can bring, a quiet that feels both peaceful and isolating. I woke up around 10 the next morning, feeling groggy but free. The day stretched before me, an empty canvas. I spent most of it in a state of blissful lethargy, migrating from the couch to the kitchen and back again. I didn't talk to anyone, didn't text any friends. I was reveling in the silence, in the sheer novelty of being the sole occupant of my own universe. As evening descended on the second day, the novelty began to wear thin. The silence, once a welcome companion, started to feel heavy, pressing in on me from the corners of the quiet rooms. The snow had stopped, but the sky remained a thick, bruised purple blanket of cloud, and a sharp wind had picked up, rattling the bare branches of the oak tree in the front yard against the siding. Each scrape and tap sounded like someone scratching to get in. I found myself turning on more lights than necessary, trying to push back the encroaching shadows. The house, my lifelong sanctuary, suddenly felt too big, its empty rooms echoing with a loneliness that bordered on eerie. I decided to make a pot of coffee, the mundane ritual a comfort against the rising tide of my own foolish anxiety. I was just a teenager spooked by her own imagination, fueled by a weekend diet of horror films and processed cheese. It was just after 9 o'clock when I heard the knock. It wasn't a loud, insistent banging, but a soft, almost polite tapping. 3 distinct raps on the front door. I froze, the half-filled coffee pot still in my hand. Nobody knocked on our door at this hour. Our neighbors, the Hendersons to the right and the Garcias to the left, were early-to-bed types. Any friends of mine would have texted first. My immediate thought, a flimsy shield against a nameless fear, was that it was my parents. Maybe the cruise had been cancelled, a flight delayed, and they'd come home early without telling me. It was absurd, but it was the only rational explanation my mind could conjure. I set the coffee pot down on the counter, my heart starting a low, nervous thrum against my ribs. I crept from the kitchen into the front hallway, the polished hardwood cold beneath my socks. The hallway was dark, save for the ambient glow from the living room. I sidled up to the door, my body pressed against the wall, and peered through the peephole. The distorted, fisheye lens showed me a man standing on our porch. He was wearing a dark blue uniform, the kind a courier or a delivery driver might wear, complete with a matching baseball cap pulled low over his forehead. He wasn't holding a package, though. He had a clipboard clutched in one hand. His posture was relaxed, almost casual, as he shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his breath pluming in the frigid air. He didn't look particularly threatening. He looked cold. And maybe a little lost. My initial fear subsided, replaced by a cautious annoyance. I was in my pajamas, ready to settle in for another night of movies, and now I had to deal with a stranger. Still, my father's voice echoed in my head, a litany of warnings from over the years: never open the door to someone you don't know. Not for any reason. I decided to speak to him through the door. "Can I help you?" I called out, my voice sounding louder than I intended in the silent house. The man on the porch started slightly, as if he hadn't actually expected anyone to be home. He turned his face towards the door, and even through the distorted lens of the peephole, I could see him smile. It was a wide, toothy smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Sorry to bother you so late," he said, his voice a friendly, unremarkable baritone. "I've got a delivery here for a Mr. Johnson, but I think I've got the address all wrong. My GPS has been on the fritz all day with this weather. Is this Maple Creek Lane?" I relaxed another notch. It was a simple mistake. Our street was Maple Creek Drive. It happened all the time. "This is Maple Creek Drive," I replied, keeping my hand off the doorknob. "You're probably looking for the next neighborhood over." "Drive, Lane, they get me every time," he chuckled, a sound that seemed a little too loud, a little too forced. He tapped his pen against his clipboard. "So this is number 142, Maple Creek Drive, then?" "Just so I can reroute this thing." "Yes, that's right," I said, my patience starting to fray. I just wanted him to leave. I wanted to go back to my coffee and my solitude. But he didn't move. He just stood there, looking down at his clipboard, then back up at the door. The friendly smile remained plastered on his face, but his eyes, shaded by the bill of his cap, were fixed on the peephole. It felt like he was looking right at me, right through the wood and metal of the door. An unsettling stillness settled over him. The wind howled, and a branch scraped against the roof, making me jump. "Thing is," he continued, his tone shifting slightly, losing some of its forced cheerfulness, "the instructions on this one are a little unusual. It says it's a priority delivery, has to be handed directly to Mr. Johnson. No drop-offs. Are you sure he's not around? Maybe your dad?" The question hung in the air, cold and sharp. My mind raced. Why was he asking about my dad? Why was he so persistent? The initial, simple explanation of a lost delivery driver was starting to fray at the edges, revealing something darker and more complicated beneath. A prickle of real fear, cold and sharp, traced its way up my spine. "There's no Mr. Johnson here," I said, my voice firmer now, betraying none of the anxiety churning in my stomach. "You have the wrong house. The wrong street. You need to leave." For a long moment, he said nothing. He just stood there, motionless, the smile fixed on his face like a mask. The porch light cast a pale, sickly yellow glow over him, making the shadows on his face seem deeper. I could feel his gaze on the peephole, a physical pressure. It was an unnerving, predatory stillness. Then, he took a small step closer to the door. "It's awful cold out here," he said, his voice dropping to a softer, more conversational tone. "My hands are just about frozen solid. You think I could just step inside for a second to warm up? Just long enough to call my dispatcher and sort this out. My phone died about an hour ago, that was it." That was the moment the floor dropped out from under me. Every alarm bell in my head, every half-forgotten warning from my parents, every instinct I possessed, screamed in unison. No delivery driver asks to come inside. Not at night. Not ever. The flimsy facade of normalcy he had constructed shattered into a million pieces, and I saw the situation for what it was. This was not a mistake. He was not lost. He was here for a reason, and it had nothing to do with a package for a Mr. Johnson. "No," I said, my voice a choked whisper. I backed away from the door, my legs feeling weak and unsteady. "No, you can't come in. You need to leave right now, or I'm calling the police." The smile on his face didn't falter, but it changed. It twisted into something knowing, something mocking. "No need to get upset," he said, his voice oozing a placating calm that was more terrifying than any shout. "Just trying to do my job." He then casually glanced to his left, towards the side of our house. "That's a nice wind chime you have on the back porch," he commented idly. "The metal kind. Sounds like little bells when the wind catches it, doesn't it?" My blood turned to ice water in my veins. The wind chimes. They were a gift from my grandmother, a delicate, intricate set of brushed steel tubes that hung from the eaves of our back porch. They were completely invisible from the front of the house. There was no possible way he could have seen them. There was no way he could have known about them unless he had been back there. Unless he had been watching the house. The thought was paralyzing. He hadn't just shown up at my door by chance. He had been here before. He had been in my yard, in my space, lurking just beyond the thin barrier of glass and wood that I had thought was enough to keep the world out. I didn't say another word. I turned and ran, my breath catching in my throat in a silent scream. I scrambled into the kitchen, my mind a chaotic whirlwind of panic. My phone. I needed my phone. It was on the counter, right where I'd left it. I snatched it up, my fingers fumbling with the screen, slick with a sudden, cold sweat. I had to call 911. I had to get help. As my thumb hovered over the emergency call button, I heard a new sound from the front of the house. A soft, rhythmic scratching sound, right at the lock of the front door. It was the sound of metal on metal. He was trying to pick the lock. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I thought it would break. The scratching stopped. A second later, the doorknob began to jiggle, gently at first, then more and more violently. The rattling sound echoed through the silent house, a frantic, desperate percussion that seemed to sync up with my own ragged breathing. He wasn't going to give up. He was going to get in. I finally pressed the call button, the phone connecting with a series of electronic beeps that sounded deafeningly loud. A calm, female voice answered. 911, what's your emergency? There's a man, I whispered, my voice cracking, he's trying to get into my house. He's at the front door. I stumbled backward, away from the hallway, my eyes darting around the kitchen for a place to hide. The pantry? No, too obvious. Under the table? It was a flimsy wooden thing, offering no real protection. Okay, ma'am, stay on the line with me, the dispatcher said, her voice a lifeline in the suffocating terror. What is your address? I gasped out my address, my street, my town. As I did, the rattling at the front door stopped abruptly. A heavy, profound silence fell over the house once more. It was worse than the noise. The silence was full of potential, full of the unknown. Where had he gone? Had he given up? Had he heard me on the phone? I held my breath, straining to hear any sound, any indication of his location. Then I heard it. A loud thud from the back of the house. It came from the direction of the dining room, where the sliding glass door opened onto the back porch. My stomach clenched. He hadn't given up. He had just changed his point of attack. He was trying the back door now. I could picture him out there, standing on the same porch where I'd spent countless summer afternoons, his face illuminated by the cold moonlight filtering through the clouds, his hands testing the lock. "Ma'am, are you still there?" the dispatcher's voice crackled in my ear. "The police are on their way. Can you tell me if you're in a safe location?" "I'm in the kitchen," I whispered, sinking down to the floor and crawling under the small kitchen table. It was a child's hiding spot, pathetic and useless, but it was all I could think to do. I pulled my knees to my chest, trying to make myself as small as possible. From my vantage point on the cold linoleum floor, I could see the swinging door that led to the dining room. I watched it, my eyes wide with terror, waiting for it to swing open, waiting to see his dark form silhouetted against the pale light from the backyard. I heard another thud, louder this time, followed by the distinct sound of the sliding door rattling in its frame. He was putting his shoulder into it, trying to force it open. Suddenly, the faulty motion sensor floodlight on the back porch flickered on, flooding the dining room with a brief, brilliant flash of white light. Then it flickered off again. On. Off. On. Off. The strobing light created a terrifying, disorienting effect, casting long, dancing shadows across the floor and walls. In one of those brilliant flashes, I saw it. A shape. The dark silhouette of a man's head and shoulders, pressed right up against the glass of the sliding door. He was staring into the house. He was staring right at the kitchen. My breath hitched in my throat. I was sure he could see me. Then, just as suddenly as it started, everything stopped. The rattling ceased. The strobing light stayed off, plunging the back of the house into darkness again. The silence that followed was absolute, heavier and more menacing than before. My own breathing sounded like a hurricane in my ears. The dispatcher was still talking to me, her voice a distant, tinny sound, but I couldn't process her words. My entire being was focused on the silence, on the waiting. What was he doing? Why had he stopped? Was he gone? My mind, desperate for a sliver of hope, clung to the possibility that he had seen the police cars approaching, their lights flashing in the distance. But the street outside was as silent and dark as ever. There were no sirens, no flashing lights. There was nothing. Just the wind and the oppressive quiet. And then I heard a new sound. It was not from the front of the house, or the back. It was from above me. A faint, almost imperceptible creak. The sound of a floorboard settling under a heavy weight. It came from the second floor. Directly above the kitchen was my parents' bedroom. My blood ran cold. It wasn't a question. It was a certainty that exploded in my mind with the force of a physical blow. He was already inside the house. The sounds at the front and back doors, they hadn't been failed attempts. They had been a distraction. A performance designed to fix my attention downstairs while he found another way in. The small window in the upstairs bathroom, the one I sometimes left cracked open an inch for ventilation because the fan was broken. It was the only explanation. While I had been cowering in the kitchen, staring at the back door, he had been climbing onto the low roof of the porch, prying open that window, and slipping silently into the house. He had been upstairs this whole time. Listening. Waiting. The dispatcher's voice finally broke through my paralysis. "Ma'am, you need to stay on the line. Are you able to get to a room and lock the door?" But it was too late for that. He was between me and any safe room. The only way out was the way he had come in, or the doors he had just been trying to break through. I was trapped. I heard another creak from upstairs, closer this time. It was the sound of a footstep in the upstairs hallway. Then another. He was walking slowly, deliberately, as if he were savoring the moment. He was moving towards the staircase. He was coming down. I had two choices. I could stay here, huddled under this flimsy table, and wait for him to find me. Or I could run. A primal, instinctual terror overrode every rational thought in my head. Fight or flight. And I was not a fighter. I had to get out. I had to get out of the house. Now. Without another thought, I scrambled out from under the table. The phone clattered from my hand, the dispatcher's voice a frantic, distant squawk from the floor. I didn't stop to pick it up. I launched myself towards the front of the house, my stockinged feet slipping on the polished floor. I could hear his footsteps quicken on the stairs. He knew I was moving. He was coming faster now. I fumbled with the deadbolt on the front door, my fingers feeling like clumsy, useless sausages. The lock clicked open with a sound that seemed to reverberate through the entire house. I threw the door open and burst out into the night. The cold air hit me like a physical blow, a shocking, painful slap to my face and lungs. I didn't have a coat, no shoes, just my thin pajamas and socks. The snow on the ground was a layer of icy slush that instantly soaked through my socks, burning my feet with its cold. But I didn't feel it. Adrenaline was afire in my veins. I just ran. I ran across my front lawn, a desperate, wild sprint towards the warm, glowing windows of my neighbor's house. I opened my mouth and I screamed, a raw, ragged sound torn from the deepest parts of my soul. I screamed for help, I screamed in terror, I screamed because it was the only thing I could do. Lights flickered on in the Hendersons' house. I saw a curtain twitch in their living room window. I kept running, my lungs on fire, my feet numb. I risked a glance over my shoulder, back at my own house. In the open doorway, for a split second, I saw his dark shape silhouetted against the warm light of the hallway. He wasn't chasing me. He was just standing there, watching me. Then, as the Hendersons' front porch light blazed to life, he turned, not back into the house, but darted with an incredible, fluid speed across the lawn, away from the streetlights, and vanished into the deep shadows of the undeveloped woods that bordered the back of our property. He was gone as quickly as he had appeared. Mr. Henderson opened his door, his face a mask of confusion and concern. "Chloe. What on earth is going on?" he asked, his voice thick with sleep. I couldn't answer. I just collapsed onto his doorstep, sobbing, pointing a trembling finger back at my empty, open house. The police arrived minutes later. Their efficiency felt like a cruel joke after the agonizing eternity I had spent waiting for them. They moved with practiced, calm professionalism, sweeping through my house with their flashlights cutting sharp, sterile beams through the darkness. I sat wrapped in a thick blanket on the Henderson's couch, sipping a mug of hot tea that rattled against my teeth, and answered the questions of a kind-faced female officer. I told her everything, from the polite knock on the door to the chilling comment about the wind chimes. They found the upstairs bathroom window pried open, just as I had suspected. There were muddy footprints on the bath mat and in the upstairs hallway. They confirmed he had walked to the top of the stairs before I had fled. Downstairs, they found my phone on the kitchen floor, the 911 call still connected. They didn't find him. A search of the woods behind the house with dogs turned up nothing. He had simply melted away into the night. The officer taking my statement tried to be reassuring. "It was likely a burglar," she said. "He was probably more scared than you were. Your screaming scared him off before he could take anything, but I knew that wasn't true. He wasn't scared. I had seen him in the doorway. He had been calm. He had been watching. And he hadn't taken anything." The police confirmed it. My laptop was on the coffee table, my mom's jewelry box was untouched on her dresser, my dad's collection of expensive watches was still in his drawer. Nothing of value was missing. This wasn't a burglary. It was something else. Something personal and terrifyingly incomprehensible. Why play such an elaborate game? Why the courier uniform, the fake story? Why try to talk his way in when he was perfectly capable of breaking in silently? It was a performance. And I was the sole member of the audience. My parents came home the next day. They were horrified, guilt-ridden. They immediately had a state-of-the-art security system installed, with cameras and sensors on every door and window. But it didn't matter. The house was no longer my sanctuary. It was a crime scene. Every creak of the floorboards, every rattle of the wind, sent a fresh jolt of panic through me. I couldn't sleep in my own bed for months, convinced I would wake up to see him standing in the corner of my room, smiling that wide, empty smile. The silence I had once cherished now felt sinister, a canvas for my fear to paint upon. I started seeing his face in crowds, the generic, forgettable features of a man in a blue uniform. The suburbs, once a symbol of safety and peace, now felt like a place where darkness could hide in plain sight, just behind a friendly smile and a polite knock on the door. We moved a year later. My parents said it was for a better school district, but I knew it was because of me. It was because they would sometimes find me standing in the hallway in the middle of the night, just staring at the front door, unable to sleep. The new house helped, but the fear didn't go away. It had become a part of me, a permanent resident in the back of my mind. It's a quiet hum of anxiety that never truly fades, a constant reminder that the walls we build to protect ourselves are often just an illusion of safety. Even now, years later, living in a small apartment in a bustling city, I double-check the locks on my door 3, sometimes 4 times before I go to bed. I never answer a knock without verifying who it is through a text or a call first. The trauma of that night is a scar that has never fully healed. They never caught him. His identity, his motive, it all remains a terrifying, unanswered question mark in the story of my life. It wasn't until I was in college that my dad told me the final, most disturbing detail, something the police had initially kept from me to avoid causing further trauma. When they were processing the scene that night, they had gone through my bedroom. He hadn't disturbed much, just opened a few drawers, looked through my things. And inside the small wooden jewelry box on my dresser, a box he had clearly opened and sifted through, they found something that didn't belong to me. Tucked neatly next to a silver locket my grandmother had given me was a small, cheap plastic charm. The kind you get for a quarter from a gumball machine at a grocery store. It was a tiny, brightly colored figurine of a smiling mailman, holding a little letter. He hadn't taken anything from my house. But he had left something behind. A token. A souvenir of his visit. A chilling, silent message that I have been trying to decipher ever since. Was it a trophy? A joke? Or was it a promise that, someday, he might come back to finish his delivery? I still don't know, and I suspect I never will. And that, more than anything, is what keeps me awake at night.